When he quietly handed me the house keys and walked away, I knew something inside him had already died. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, in the middle of our living room, the one we built together, brick by brick, laughter by laughter, and watched the man I had loved for 12 years leave, without a word. The sound of the keys hitting the glass table echoed longer than any goodbye could. People say betrayal feels like fire, but for me, it was ice. A slow, creeping cold that started from my chest and crawled up to my throat, freezing every word I wanted to say. But to tell you how we got there, to that moment where silence said everything, I have to take you back. To before I became the woman left standing in an empty room. To before I reported his affair. Our marriage had never been perfect, but it had been safe. Steady. Predictable, in the way old shoes are worn out, but familiar. My husband, Daniel, was a man of few words. An accountant. Practical, composed, and always on time. I used to joke that even his emotions had a schedule. I, on the other hand, was the dreamer. I ran a small flower shop 2 blocks from our home. Mornings smelled like lilies and coffee. The afternoons were filled with soft chatter from customers, women picking bouquets for anniversaries, young men nervously choosing roses for first dates. Daniel would drop by sometimes after work. He'd stand by the door, loosen his tie, and watch me arrange flowers. He said he loved the way my hands looked when I tied ribbons. "You make things beautiful without even trying," he'd say. For years, that was enough. Our life was quiet, even sweet at times. Dinner at 7. His whiskey at 8. My late-night reading until he called for me from the bed. A rhythm. Comfortable. Steady. But sometimes, steady can hide cracks you don't notice, until the light hits them just right. The first clue came like a whisper, not a thunderstorm. He started working late. That in itself wasn't strange. Tax season kept him buried in spreadsheets. But then, the late nights stretched longer. His phone, once left casually on the counter, now followed him everywhere, even into the bathroom. I told myself not to overthink it. I trusted him. I really did. But trust isn't blind. It's a quiet voice that asks questions you're too afraid to answer. One night, as I was closing the shop, I noticed a missed call from an unknown number on his phone, which he had accidentally left on my counter. I wasn't snooping, at least that's what I told myself as I stared at the glowing screen. The call had come 3 times in a row, and the message that followed was short, almost careless. "I'm here. Room 214. The world around me blurred. I remember the sharp smell of lilies, the hum of the old ceiling fan, the faint throb in my chest. I didn't call back. I didn't even confront him that night. Instead, I went home, made dinner, and waited for him to walk through the door, like always. He smiled, kissed my forehead, told me about some client meeting that went long. And I nodded, my smile stretched thin, while every word he said felt like glass under my skin. That night, I lay beside him, listening to his steady breathing, wondering how a person could sleep so peacefully with lies between them. The next few weeks were torture disguised as routine. He kept up appearances, breakfast together, polite laughter, occasional tenderness. But the distance grew in invisible inches. I noticed the cologne, not the one I bought him. The faint shimmer of lip gloss on his shirt collar. The sudden password on his laptop. Every sign pointed in one direction, yet I clung to denial like it was my last defense against drowning. Until the day I couldn't anymore. It was a Wednesday. I remember because it was raining, the kind of rain that makes you want to stay home and bake cookies. I had gone to his office to surprise him with lunch. Something I hadn't done in years. The receptionist smiled politely, but hesitated. "Oh, Mr. Hale just left with his client," she said, avoiding my eyes. I nodded, pretending not to notice her discomfort. Something in me, maybe the part that already knew, told me to drive around the block. And that's when I saw them. Daniel and a woman, laughing under his umbrella. Her hand brushed his arm as if it belonged there. And the look on his face, it wasn't guilt or panic. It was peace. I followed them only long enough to see them walk into a cafe, sit close, and share something that used to be ours, quiet comfort. I didn't confront him that day. I went home, sat in the dark, and cried until my throat hurt. Then I did something I never thought I would do. I gathered the evidence, screenshots, call logs, photos, and reported the affair to his company's HR department. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. He was having an affair with a subordinate, a direct breach of company ethics. Part of me hoped he'd come home angry, shouting, denying. That would have been easier. Familiar. But what he did instead, that changed everything. He came home early that evening. No anger. No explanations. Just a strange calm, like a man who had already accepted a verdict. He placed a small folder on the table. Inside were property transfer papers. Our house, the car, and even the joint account all signed over to me. And then he said quietly, I transferred everything else into her name. I'm leaving. I remember laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. You're what? I asked. He looked at me with eyes I barely recognized. It's done. You don't need to fight me. I'm sorry, Ava. I can't do this anymore. And just like that, he walked out. No explanation. No shouting. Just the soft click of the door and the hum of silence that followed. That was the night everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and justice shattered quietly in my hands. I didn't know it then, but that was also the night I would start rebuilding myself, not as a wife, but as a woman who had finally seen the truth. I didn't sleep that night. The clock on the wall ticked like a metronome, measuring the distance between the woman I used to be and the stranger I was becoming. Every sound in the house felt too loud, the refrigerator hum, the rain against the windows, even my own breath. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at the folder he'd left behind. The papers were clean, neat, typed with the same precision Daniel used for everything. His signature sat at the bottom of each page, elegant, detached. Like he'd signed away not just our assets, but our history. The house felt foreign now. Every room was a memory I didn't ask for. The living room where we danced once, when our first business loan was approved. The hallway where he kissed my neck after coming home late from work, back when I thought late meant hardworking. The bedroom that still smelled faintly of his cologne. I kept thinking, who was I married to all these years? In the morning, I called his office. The receptionist paused before answering, her tone uneasy. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hale. Daniel resigned last night. Resigned. Just like that. He had erased himself from every part of my life, personal and professional, overnight. I wasn't sure what hurt more, that he cheated or that he walked away without even trying to explain. Days passed in a strange fog. People called, texted, checked in. I avoided them all. Even my mother, who lived just 15 minutes away, stopped by with homemade soup and soft pity in her eyes. Sweetheart, she said gently, maybe it's for the best. Some men carry storms inside them. It's not your fault if you couldn't calm his. I wanted to believe her. But I couldn't shake the guilt, the thought that maybe I had become too routine, too predictable, too quiet. Maybe he needed something I couldn't give. But guilt is a cruel houseguest. Once you let it in, it rearranges all the furniture inside your mind. A week later, I finally saw her, the woman he had left me for. I was at the grocery store, standing in the produce aisle, holding a bruised apple one didn't intend to buy. She walked in like she belonged everywhere, tall, polished, confident in a way that drew attention without trying. I recognized her instantly. She was the woman from the cafe. The one under the umbrella. Our eyes met for a moment. Hers flickered with something between surprise and guilt. She hesitated, then offered a polite smile, the kind women use when they don't know if they should apologize or defend themselves. I didn't say a word. I just placed the apple down and walked away. But inside, something shifted. Anger. Not the screaming kind, but the slow, simmering anger of realization. He had left me, the woman who built his world, and handed everything we owned to her. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and began looking through our old financial files. Years of shared passwords, joint tax returns, and mortgage details. I had never paid much attention. Daniel handled everything. But now I had to. And that's when I discovered the second betrayal. A month before he left, Daniel had quietly taken out a loan, a large one, using our house as collateral. The money? Gone. Transferred to her account. I stared at the numbers on the screen until they blurred. My chest tightened, breath shallow. It wasn't enough that he left. He had left me with debt. I felt humiliated, but beneath that humiliation was something stronger, resolve. If he thought I would sit quietly and crumble, he didn't know me at all. The next morning, I called our family lawyer. "Mr. Rowe, I need help," I said, my voice shaking but firm. I explained everything, the transfers, the affair, the resignation, the debt. He sighed, long and heavy. "Ava, legally, this is complicated. If the transfer was voluntary and notarized, reversing it will be tough. But we can try to prove coercion or fraud." Coercion. Fraud. Words I never thought would belong in my marriage. That day, something inside me hardened. The woman who once arranged flowers and believed in forever, she started learning about legal loopholes, property rights, and financial investigations. I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I was looking for justice. Weeks turned into months. Lawyers, paperwork, hearings. Every letter with his name on it reopened wounds I thought had closed. Daniel didn't show up in court. He sent a representative, a young lawyer with a polite smile who said, "Mr. Hale wishes to keep this amicable." Amicable. What a convenient word for cowardice. But slowly, the tide began to turn. Evidence surfaced, emails, transfers, internal memos from his old firm. Turns out, his affair wasn't just personal. It had crossed professional boundaries, and the company was conducting its own investigation. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of justice. Not the kind that restores what you lost, but the kind that restores your faith in balance. It was around that time I began journaling, small, quiet notes each night before bed. About grief. About anger. About learning to live without closure. Writing became my therapy. And one evening, while sitting on the porch with my notebook and a cup of tea, I realized something profound. I wasn't waiting for him to apologize anymore. I was healing. One morning, months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name in his handwriting. Inside was a short note. "Ava, I know you'll never forgive me. I don't expect you to. I made choices I can't justify. I thought I was chasing freedom, but all I did was destroy the only peace I ever had. She's gone now too. I lost everything. Take care of yourself. You were always the better one. Daniel." I folded the letter neatly and placed it in my drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just whispered, "You're right. I was." By the time the legal process ended, I had recovered most of what was mine. Not everything, but enough to rebuild. And that's what I did. I reopened the flower shop, renamed it A New Blooms. Fitting, I thought. Because that's what I was becoming, something new, something alive, something that grew from brokenness. But the real turning point came months later, when a young woman came into my shop, crying. She had just found out her husband was cheating. She said she didn't know what to do. I handed her a white lily, the flower of rebirth. And I told her the same thing I had once needed to hear. "You'll survive this. Maybe not as the person you were, but as the woman you were meant to be." The days began to stretch differently after that. They no longer bled into each other the way grief days do. I found rhythm again, not the one I had shared with Daniel, but one that belonged only to me. Mornings started with the soft clink of the shop's keys in the door, the smell of fresh-cut stems, and sunlight warming the wooden counter. My hands remembered the motion of tying ribbons, trimming leaves, and arranging color palettes that spoke in emotions, yellow for hope, pink for healing, white for peace. Customers started returning. Some came for flowers. Some stayed for conversation. One of them, Mrs. Patel, an elderly widow who lived nearby, began stopping in every Thursday. She always bought a single daisy. One for him, she'd say, and one for me, in my heart. I liked that, the quiet way she honored her past, but still chose life. Maybe that's what healing is, not erasing what hurt you, but making space beside it for something new. But healing isn't a straight line. Some nights, I still woke up at 2 a.m., reaching for the empty side of the bed before remembering he wasn't there. The silence would hit me like a wave. I'd walk to the kitchen, pour myself some water, and glance at the drawer where his letter sat. I never opened it again. Not because I hated him, but because I had learned that closure doesn't always come from the person who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from watching yourself survive. 6 months after Daniel left, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Hale," a man's voice said. "I'm calling from St. Augustine Hospital. A Mr. Daniel Hale listed you as his emergency contact." My grip on the phone tightened. Emergency contact. The words felt foreign, outdated, like a label that didn't belong to me anymore. "He was admitted last night," the man continued. "A minor accident. He asked if you could come." For a moment, I just stood there, caught between anger and instinct. He had erased me from his life. And yet, in his moment of need, my name was still the one on file. I almost didn't go. Almost. But curiosity, or maybe closure, won. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and loneliness. When I entered his room, he looked smaller. Not physically, but in spirit. His hair had streaks of gray I hadn't noticed before. His eyes, once confident, now carried the weight of consequence. He smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," I replied quietly. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside him. Finally, he spoke. "She left," he said. "Took the money, the car, everything." There was no bitterness in his tone, only exhaustion. I looked at him, the man who had once been my world, and felt nothing. Not hatred. Not love. Just distance. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And maybe for the first time, I believed him. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a slow untying of knots inside your chest. As I left the hospital that evening, I didn't look back. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel heavy. I think part of healing is realizing that some apologies are not for reconciliation, they're for release. Months later, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, painting. I cleared the small guest room, set up an easel, and began painting scenes that mirrored my emotions: waves, broken vases, dawn skies. It wasn't about art. It was about rediscovering the parts of me I'd abandoned while trying to be someone's wife. One evening, while cleaning brushes, I thought about how life circles back in unexpected ways. How the woman who once reported her husband's affair now teaches art therapy workshops for women rebuilding their lives. How the shop, A New Blooms, had become more than a business, it had become a sanctuary. There was one moment that defined it all. A young girl, maybe 16, came in one afternoon. She looked fragile, holding a small bouquet. "Can you write something for the card?" she asked. "It's for my mom. My dad left last month." I smiled softly. "Of course. What would you like it to say?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe something that means we'll be okay." I wrote, "The garden still grows, even after the storm." She read it, smiled through her tears, and whispered, "Thank you." And that's when I realized this was my full circle. The pain that once broke me had become the voice that helped others heal. A year after everything happened, I visited the beach alone. It was sunset, the kind of gold that makes everything look like forgiveness. The waves lapped gently at my feet, and I stood there, letting the wind tangle my hair, feeling whole for the first time. I didn't think of Daniel as the man who betrayed me anymore. I thought of him as the man who unknowingly freed me from routine, from fear, from the illusion of forever. When I returned home, I found an envelope waiting at the door. No name, no address. Just a single line written in neat handwriting. "Thank you for forgiving me, even when I didn't deserve it." I smiled faintly. Not because I forgave him, but because I finally understood that forgiveness was never about him. It was about me, about letting go of the story where I was the victim and rewriting it as the story where I found strength. Now, whenever someone asks what happened, I tell them the truth softly, without bitterness. My husband had an affair, I say. He left, and I learned how to stay. Because sometimes staying with yourself, in your truth, in your quiet, is the bravest thing you can do. And when I lock up the shop each night, I whisper to the flowers, "Bloom again tomorrow." No matter what. Word travels in small towns like mine faster than truth ever can. By the time Daniel's company scandal made the local paper, I was already tired of being the woman he left. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some whispered pity, others whispered gossip, but they all whispered. At first, I hated it. Then I stopped caring. Because there comes a point when your story no longer belongs to other people's mouths. It belongs to your own voice, calm, steady, unshakable. It started with a headline. Local accountant resigns amid internal misconduct investigation. The article didn't mention names, but people knew. They always know. Customers came into my shop pretending they were there for flowers, but their eyes were filled with curiosity. One woman even leaned across the counter and whispered, "Heard he lost everything to that girl." You must be relieved. Relieved. What a strange word to use for grief. I just smiled softly and said, "No one wins when promises are broken." And that became my truth, quiet, unglamorous, but real. A few weeks later, the woman, her, walked into my shop again. She looked different this time. No makeup, no confidence, just someone trying to disappear inside her own skin. For a second, I thought she might turn around and leave, but she stayed. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. Her voice trembled, eyes darting between the flowers and the floor. "He told me he was unhappy." I believed him. I thought. She paused, swallowing hard. I thought I was saving him. I studied her for a moment. She couldn't have been more than 30, but life had already taught her a lesson she'd never forget. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "But I hope you learn to love yourself enough not to be someone's escape." She nodded, tears forming, and left without buying anything. After she walked out, I stood there among the flowers, surrounded by the scent of forgiveness. And for the first time, it didn't sting. Months passed. Life didn't get easier, but it got clearer. I started volunteering at a women's center on weekends. Most of the women there had stories like mine, told in different accents, with different names, but the same ache. One evening, while hosting a small group session, I told them my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. There was silence when I finished. Then one woman, her eyes red from crying, said, "You make it sound like peace is possible." I smiled. It is. But you have to build it yourself. That night, I walked home in the rain, the same kind of rain that had fallen the day I discovered his affair. But it didn't feel heavy this time. It felt cleansing. By the end of that year, I was different, softer, stronger, wiser. I started traveling on weekends, taking long drives just to see new places. I redecorated the house, painted the walls pale sage, replaced every photograph that reminded me of us with images of me. Not lonely, just alone in the most peaceful way. Then, one morning, as I was sipping coffee by the window, I saw him. Daniel. Standing by the gate, looking unsure, almost hesitant. He didn't look like the man I once loved or the man who betrayed me. He looked like someone still searching for something he'd already lost. I opened the door. "Hi," he said softly. I was passing through. "Thought I should stop by." I nodded. "You can come in." He looked around, noticing the changes, the lighter walls, the new art, the warmth that didn't include him anymore. "It looks different," he said. "So do I replied. We sat across from each other, two people connected by memories, but divided by choices. He sighed. "I've been living with my sister. Haven't worked much. I keep thinking about what I did, how easily I walked away from everything that mattered." I didn't interrupt. I just listened the same way I used to when I thought love meant understanding silence. Finally, he said, "You seem happy." "Really happy." "I am," I said, smiling faintly. "But it's not the kind of happiness you gave me. It's the kind I found after losing you." He looked down, eyes glistening. "You deserved better, Ava." "I know," I said. "And now I finally give that to myself." He left soon after. No tears, no anger, just quiet acceptance. I watched him walk away one last time. But this time, the sound of the closing gate didn't break me. It freed me. Weeks later, I received an invitation. The Women's Center was hosting an event called Stories of Strength. They wanted me to speak. Standing on that small stage, looking at the faces of women who reminded me of my past self, I began my story with the same line that had started everything. When he quietly handed me the house keys and walked away, I knew something inside him had already died. But this time, I didn't end it in sorrow. I ended it with hope. Sometimes, we lose people to find ourselves. Sometimes, love leaves and life begins. The audience stood, applauding softly, some crying, some smiling. And in that moment, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt peace. The shop thrived. The house became a home again. And I learned the most beautiful lesson life could teach. Healing isn't about forgetting the betrayal. It's about remembering yourself before it happened and choosing to meet that version of you again with open arms. Now, when customers come in asking for flowers for someone special, I smile and tell them, make sure that someone is you. Because love, the kind that stays, must first bloom inside your own heart. There's a kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. It's the silence that lives in my home now, gentle, steady, and alive. It hums with the sound of the kettle, the rustle of pages, and the laughter of the women who visit my shop. Sometimes I still walk past the mirror and pause, not to check my reflection, but to thank the woman looking back. The one who stayed when everything else left. The one who rebuilt her world from the shards of what was broken. People often ask if I ever saw Daniel again. The truth is no. A few years passed, and his name faded from conversations. He moved to another city, or so I heard. But every now and then, I'd get a message from someone saying they'd seen him, sitting alone at a cafe, or working odd jobs quietly. The woman he left me for? She married someone else. I saw her once in passing, holding a child's hand, smiling. And for reasons I can't explain, I was happy for her. Because forgiveness, when it's real, isn't selective. It spills over. It blesses everyone who once hurt you, even if they never ask for it. One evening, I found an old photo album while cleaning. There we were, Daniel and I, a younger, unguarded, unaware of how fragile we really were. I didn't cry. I just smiled faintly and whispered, thank you. Not for what he did, but for what it taught me. That love is not ownership. That marriage is not protection. And that sometimes, the person you have to report is the one who taught you not to settle for less than truth. The shop has become more than a business now. It's a place where stories bloom with the flowers. Women come in carrying heartbreak and leave with lilies, daisies, or sunflowers, small reminders that beauty still exists. Every bouquet I tie feels like a quiet prayer for the ones still breaking, still waiting, still learning to breathe again. And when I hand them their flowers, I always say, take care of yourself first. The world can wait. Sometimes at night, I sit on the porch and watch the stars. The sky always looks different after pain, clearer, deeper, more honest. I think of how close I came to losing myself trying to hold on to someone else. And I remember that woman in the mirror, the one who said, no more. That moment of choice was the real turning point, not the betrayal, not the confrontation, not even the court case. Just that quiet decision, I choose me. If you've ever found yourself standing in the ruins of love, wondering how to start again, I hope you remember this. You don't have to start with forgiveness. You just have to start with truth. Because truth is what clears the fog. It's what builds the foundation for peace. And peace, once you find it, never leaves you the way people do. I think about Daniel sometimes. Not with bitterness, but with distance, like remembering a chapter in a book you've already finished. Maybe he found peace too. Maybe he's still searching. Either way, it's no longer my story to tell. My story is here in the small moments. In the smell of roses at dawn. In the way the sunlight hits the counter of my shop. In the laughter that fills a space once hollow. Healing doesn't announce itself. It grows quietly, like roots under the soil, until one day you realize you're standing tall again. There's a saying I once read, some storms come to clear your path. That was mine. The affair, the loss, the silence, they were all part of the same storm. And when it passed, I finally saw the path I was meant to walk. Not beside him. Not behind him. But forward alone, strong, whole. If I could go back to the woman I was on that rainy Wednesday, sitting in the car watching them under the umbrella, I'd tell her one thing. You're not losing him. You're finding you. Because that's the truth most of us learn too late sometimes. The breaking is the beginning. And now every story I hear, every customer, every confession, every tear wiped on a sleeve reminds me that pain connects us. But it's love, not the romantic kind, but the quiet, selfless, patient kind that saves us. The other day, a young woman came into the shop and said she was getting married. She asked if I could make her bouquet. When I handed it to her, I smiled and said, "Don't forget, marriage is not the end of your story. It's just another chapter. Make sure it's one you're proud to read later." She smiled, not fully understanding, but I knew one day she would. And so, when I lock the doors of Anew Blooms each night and turn off the lights, I whisper one last thing to myself, a reminder that started as a survival mantra but became a truth. I reported my husband's affair, but what I really did was report myself missing, and then I found me. Sometimes, we expect betrayal to end us. But maybe, it's there to begin something new. What would you have done if you found proof of betrayal, walked away, or waited for answers that might never come? Tell me in the comments, my loves. And if you've ever had to rebuild after heartbreak, remember this, your story isn't over. It's just finally becoming yours. Stay kind, stay gentle, and if you're listening tonight with a heavy heart, know that even broken things can bloom again.